but what do you say to your critics?
Again, you're being an activist. I am
That's not appropriate, sir.
Who are you with? What's your name?
That's not an appropriate question for you to ask.
You're going to ask how many questions? You get 3?
You're a stupid son of a bitch.
Good morning, Liberty lovers, Liberty curious, and anyone else tuning in to Friendly Fire. If you're watching live, then let me especially thank you for tuning in so early. This show is dedicated to interviewing libertarian candidates running for office and only libertarian candidates. As the name suggests, candidates will be asked some tough questions. But as a fellow libertarian, I'm not here to make them look foolish or fail. I'm raising the bar for interviewing candidates, as well as our expectation for candidates. The Libertarian Party is the third largest political party in the United States and the only viable option to compete with the big two. I deviate in this episode from having a candidate on to take a look back at some debates. Our Georgia peers were fortunate enough to see Chase Oliver, Shane Hazel, and Ryan Graham participate in debates against their opponents as candidates, libertarian candidates, for U.S. Senate, governor, and lieutenant governor, respectively. My initial intent was to review Chase's debate, but while prepping, I realized that Shane and Ryan also participated in debates as well. Now, I'm not going to review the entirety of each debate. You're better off simply watching the debates, and I encourage it. They'll be in the links for those will be in the show notes. What I am going to do is highlight what I think are the strongest responses, weakest responses, and some additional thoughts for each of them. We should always be seeking to edify and learn from each other. In Toastmasters, an organization known for improving speaking and leadership skills, there are numerous roles dedicated for that very purpose. A typical meeting has members that are conducting roles of like grammarian, counter, and timer. Very useful as you're traveling down the public speaking journey, but they're unnecessary here. The more useful role here is that of an evaluator. This person listens to the prepared speeches and gives them feedback on how each speaker presents. They monitor delivery such as speed and tone, body language, use of hands, and how well they connect with the audience, and some other things. And that's what I'm going to be doing in this episode. As it happens, in Toastmasters, these evaluations are both used to improve the speaker being evaluated as well as members of the audience. Because who knows, the next person on the debate stage may be you. So let's go ahead and get started with Chase's debate. I'm going to listen to this very first clip here. Now, Chase's debate included only Senator Warnock. His Republican opponent, Herschel Walker, declined to attend. Since the debate was scheduled for an hour, it gave Chase quite a bit of time to speak, and Chase did very well with that available time. I want to start with where I think he gave his weakest answer, so let's listen in.
This question is for Mr. Oliver. You are running as Georgia's first openly gay Senate candidate. What protections for the LGBTQ community do you think Congress needs to take up?
Well, I've said in the past that I support the Equality Act, but at the end of the day, what we need to be doing is stop demonizing LGBTQ people. You know, I hear all day long from folks like Herschel Walker and about how terrible LGBTQ people are, about how they're destroying our children. Well, the fact is I was a gay child one time, and I was thankful that I had supportive teachers and supportive people in my life that could help me as I was growing up. And I don't want to do away with that. But the reality is we have far too many people looking to demonize LGBTQ people, and I am not one who's going to stand for that. Of course, I support, like I said, I support the Equality Act. But the best way for me to be a good representative as an LGBTQ person is to get up, do the work, and be like just everybody else, because that's what LGBTQ people are. We just love different people. There's nothing inherently wrong with us, and I think there's something we can be proud of. I was proud to be marching the Pride Parade as the first ever LGBTQ statewide candidate. I was a few cars behind you, sir, but, you know, I enjoyed the Pride Parade altogether. And I think the two people on this stage will absolutely stand for LGBTQ people. But I want people to know that, you know, you have somebody you can support who knows what it's like to grow up LGBTQ and who knows what it's like to find that support in people in their lives. And we need to be supporting that.
All right. So Chase starts out very strong and he does a couple of noteworthy things. Number one, he calls out his opponent. This is politics. So highlighting what your opponent believes is good. And on the debate stage, when you call them out by name, you almost force them to respond. You'll notice that in some of these debates, people will say, hey, can I get a chance to respond? They called me. They said my name, right? Now, had Walker been present, he would not have been able to just simply ignore Chase. Chase then identifies having once been a gay child. He's now speaking to gay youth and members of the gay community who might recall their own childhood. He then makes his position very clear, saying, quote, I am not one who's going to stand for that. He's very clear about his position. The answer was great if you were a member of the LGBTQ community. If you are not, then it leaves you out. Remember, anyone running for an elected position is running to represent everyone within the scope of their representative role. It's up to you as the candidate to figure out how to convince others to support what you support. And that means you have to address any concerns that they have. For example, it would have been great if Chase had added something like this. And for those outside the LGBTQ community, I want to bridge any lingering division you may have with a community that I am a part of. We may not always agree, but I will be the candidate you can trust to hear out your concerns and work hard to make sure you are included in the conversation. My goal is a united people, and I'm willing to do the hard work to make that happen. This is not including people for the sake of including them, or the same as saying all lives matter when someone else says Black Lives Matter. This is about a candidate speaking to the widest number of people in order to gain their support. Now, his strongest answer, believe you me, he had some great responses, was on the matter of green energy. So let me go ahead and pull up that clip.
This question goes to Mr. Oliver. President Biden has called climate change an existential threat. Daily high temperatures are getting higher. Polar ice caps are melting. Storms are becoming more powerful. Sea levels are rising. If you are Georgia's senator next year, what legislation would you introduce to not just improve our environment, but limit and bring down carbon emissions, which have been tied to climate change?
Well, I think it sounds great to say that we could just magically pass a bill and stop using less carbon and lower the carbon output. But that's just not the way it's going to work. And when you rely on government to solve all the problems, that's when you're going to get stifled innovation. If government were designing phone chargers, we'd be using USB chargers from 10 years ago, and we would never, ever try to innovate. And so the truth is we need to actually get out of the way and let the marketplace innovate. There are many, many people who have a vested interest in providing the best products and the new products that are going to provide our green future. And what we need to do is get out of the way of that. Quit over-regulating green technology, get out of the way, and we can fight climate change, but that doesn't require massive government action, doesn't require carbon caps and all new government programs. It just requires us to buckle down, have that American innovation that we are known for, and we are going to develop the technologies that will power us into the future, not using carbon-based fuels. In the meantime, government doesn't really have a role in deciding what technology is going to be developing in the next few years.
All right. So Chase does three things in this response that I really like. Number one, he ignores the details for the larger picture. The question asked included a variety of climate changes that people love debating, such as the sea levels, rising temperatures, so forth. Chase sidesteps all of them to focus on the proper, in my opinion, the proper libertarian answer, which is to take it out of the hands of government and let the free market innovate. Number two, he then supports with a simple example that we can all relate to, phone chargers. He says, hey, if the government were in charge of phone chargers, we'd be using them from 10 years ago. And then he finally makes sure to state his position unequivocally, ending his response with, quote, government really doesn't have a role in deciding what technology is going to be developed in the next few years. But it gets even better because next, his opponent, who was present, did answer, and then the panel member had a follow-up question for Chase. So let's hear that follow-up question and see how he handled that.
I did have a follow-up for Mr. Oliver. So seems like you're primarily interested in market-driven forces. Can you name an example of an innovation that brought down carbon emissions that had no government incentive tied to it?
Well, I think it's very hard to get that because of the big government, world we live in. Every major company is trying to reach out for every subsidy and giveaway they can. But the truth is we need to bring market competition back to it. We don't just need to be having a scramble for who can get the next federal dollars. We need to have people who are innovating the next technologies. Now, what technologies do we have? I imagine Tesla, Elon Musk would have developed a car with or without subsidies. Now, he'll take the subsidies because anybody will take free money, but it's your money, it's your taxpayer money that's going in Elon Musk's pocket. He's a billionaire. He can afford to develop his own electric vehicles without taking taxpayer money for it and upping our debt and making our debt crisis even worse. We don't need to be printing money out of thin air to give money to green billionaires to develop new technology. They'll do that on their own.
All right, so bam, it was an opportunity for Chase to be called out, but he was prepared. He follows up by pointing out that the current system is really just a scramble for money and that everybody's taking it. So in order to be able to identify somebody who has done something entirely in the free market would be practically impossible because of the way that the system is set up. But then he goes on to point out that Elon Musk, who everybody knows, would have developed Tesla with or without subsidies. But of course, he takes them because who turns down free money, right? He then points out that the problem, he makes sure to point out that the problem is with these subsidies. It was a great answer, and it showed that Chase was totally prepared. And so I really enjoyed that, I think, and I hope that you end up watching his debate, and I hope you will enjoy the things that he had to say and get a lot of takeaway from that. So now let's move on to Shane Hazel, and we'll talk about where he, what I thought about him. Now, in the case of, unlike Chase's debate, both of Shane's opponents were present. He handled them well. So let's start again with what I think was his weakest moment. Losing my track here. And there.
Thank you very much.
If I may respond, because
30 seconds.
This is going to go back and forth between the Democrats and the Republicans. If they keep attacking each other, I'm going to say
we've got to move on. Ms. Abrams, 30 seconds.
For
Mr. Hazel, we've got to move on.
We're not going to be excluded from this.
I'm not excluding you, but he did refer to her, so we're going to have her speak first.
You're going to take money and property from people that don't even attend your schools because they don't agree with them.
We want to move on. Ms. Abrams.
All right. So what had happened was Brian Kemp, the current governor, the incumbent, had mentioned Stacey Abrams, and Abrams has an opportunity now to speak. Compared to his opponents, Kemp and Abrams, Shane has a much more orotund voice. It's very deep and it carries very, very well. And he comes across with a very distinctly strong personality. Now, that in itself is not a problem. In fact, it's very much an asset. Abrams was rather reserved, while Kemp, he did get a little combative at times. However, the gap between Kemp combative and Shane combative gives the illusion that when Shane does it, it's worse. He's taller, he's got bigger hand gestures, and he's got a deeper, louder voice. So when he does it, compared again to Kemp, he gets combative as well, but compared to him, it does appear that Shane is being extremely combative. Now, I don't think he was really doing anything out of the ordinary than what we might see with other candidates in other debates. It just so happens that the distinction between the two makes it look that much bigger. The only recommendation here is that Shane and others with similar personalities and voices are mindful of this. People aren't necessarily turned off they're turned off by what is perceived more than what is necessarily true. And now, what about his best moment? Well, from the clips that I saw floating around Twitter, I think anyone who saw part of the debate knows which parts of the debate were some of his best moments. And we might even have a debate on which one. But here's the one that I thought was just absolutely amazing. Let's go ahead and play this clip.
Thank you. Shane Hazel, please ask your question to Brian Kemp.
Brian, in 2020, on April 2nd, you locked down Georgia, threatening peaceful people with force and coercion. You called people in Georgia non-essential, and it killed millions of jobs. You bent the knee to big pharma and pushed a vaccine that was untested on people, and it has killed people. They have lost their loved ones. You've allowed bureaucracy to invade our businesses. And then you had the audacity to brag about record tax revenue. You want to say sorry to anybody?
So is that a question or?
That is a question. Do you want to say sorry to anybody?
Oh.
All right. So this was absolutely amazing. He lays out Governor Kemp's own record, and then he ends it with a simple question. Do you want to say sorry to anybody? And Kemp was taken off guard. But here's the fun part. The question couldn't have been any simpler. So Kemp, by asking if that was even a question, which it very clearly was, he looks like a buffoon that wasn't even paying attention when the question was literally a simple yes or no. Do I want to say I'm sorry? Yes, I'm sorry, people. Here's why I shouldn't have done it. Or more likely, no, I'm not sorry. Here's why. And then he's forced to stand on his own record. But of course, the way that it was laid out, the simplicity of it, really caught him off guard. And honestly, I think that Governor Kemp walked into this like many, many people do. They walk in thinking, okay, it's a third party candidate. I can ignore them. I don't have to worry too much about them. But I think in this particular case, he made a very serious mistake and that he was absolutely unprepared to deal with somebody of Shane's caliber. So that was a great response or question that he had given to Governor Kemp. I will also point out this. Shane, if you watch the video and you can go back, Shane was very clear to look the governor in the eye while asking the question. Even called him out by name. I believe he called him by his first name, Brian. So what it does is it shows a level of confidence that we should expect from a governor candidate. He gets up there, he's on stage, he's big, he's got the presence, he's got a very booming voice. So it's very clear, I belong. Remember, this is something that the Libertarian Party has trouble with. We have trouble getting on the stage. And then when we get on the stage, the question is, do we look like we belong on the stage? And when Shane was on there, he absolutely looks 100% like he not only belongs on the stage, but he belongs at that level, the level of a governor for an entire state. All right. We finished up with Shane. So let's go ahead and we're going to check out Ryan Graham, who is the lieutenant governor candidate running for the state of Georgia as well. Now, first and foremost, this one was kind of tough because there were 3 candidates on stage, but the debate was only like 26 minutes long. So there isn't much material to choose from. But let's see where I saw Ryan's worst moment. So let me pull that clip up really quickly here.
Raul, you get the first question to Ryan Graham.
Mr. Graham, welcome to our debates. The question I have for you is, James and I remember covering the Georgia legislature, being in the Georgia legislature in 2003, when Republicans took control and stripped a Democratic lieutenant governor of much of the power he had in the state Senate. If you are elected into a body that will most likely be a Republican body, how will you be able to operate? What will you be able to do as the lieutenant governor and the president of the Georgia State Senate?
Yeah, Raul, thank you for the question, and thank you to the Atlanta Press Club for having me. Yeah, it's an interesting conundrum to be in, knowing that the Senate would essentially strip the powers from the lieutenant governor if there was somebody who was not politically aligned with them. But I still think that the position could be used as a bully pulpit to talk about the issues that are important to me, like educational freedom, criminal justice reform, and election reform. And so, I still think that I can add a lot of value to that, to the position, and I can make sure that I can help senators from both sides of the aisle work together on the issues that I think are important by helping to be the bridge that you don't see in the Senate today.
All right. First of all, I made a mistake. I said I called this the weakest moment. I got my clips reversed. So what I actually think is this is his strongest moment. Now, Ryan is basically asked, how will you be useful if the rest of the government locks you out, as they have done before? What I like here, and again, I made a mistake earlier. I misspoke. What I meant to say was this is his, in my opinion, his best moment. Ryan acknowledges the possibility that it could happen, but he has an answer, and not just any answer. It's one that people can understand. He'll use it as a bully pulpit, basically a platform to talk about what is happening at the state level and things that he cares about. He also specifically points out items that he would want to talk about, such as educational freedom, criminal justice reform, and election reform. Things that that are on the minds of voters. So that was a very good response because it is a big question. What happens to the libertarian who gets in there and maybe gets shut out? Everybody's just basically elbowing them out of the way. Well, we want to let people know that when we're on stage, we want to let them know, hey, yeah, if you vote me in there, even if they try to, push me to the side, no, I've got a backup plan. I'm prepared for that. Now let's take a look at Ryan's weakest moment. And this is his question for Jones. So let's hear how that plays out.
Thank you. My question is for Burt Jones. On October 13th, you tweeted out that inflation is out of control, 401ks are being decimated, real wages are plummeting, and gas prices are through the roof. Now, all that's true, but then you went on to say Democrats are solely to blame. President Trump, even pre-pandemic, continued President Obama's policy of printing new money to pay for bloated budgets, contributing heavily to the inflation levels we're now seeing. How could you possibly help resolve the issue if you're unwilling to concede even partial responsibility in the contributions by Republicans to the current crisis being felt by all Georgians?
All right. So the question was actually pretty decent. It was a bit long, which means that I, the viewer, need to really focus to get it all in. But after his opponent answers is where I actually felt that Ryan kind of has this opportunity where he needs to improve a little bit. So I'm going to skip out Burt Jones's response. We don't really need to hear that. You can go and listen to that. Remember, all of the links to all the debates are going to be in the show notes, so you can go check them out there. But so I'm going to skip out all the responses from all the opponents. And but what I want you to hear is what Ryan says after Jones's response. So let's play that clip really quick.
Mr. Graham, your rebuttal.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah. The suspension of the gas tax is great. I would argue that elimination would be even better. Like you said, actually, President Trump continued President Obama's policy of increasing the money supply to pay for ever-increasing budgets. By the end of his one term in office, $6.7 trillion was added to the national debt. President Trump criticized our own Governor Kemp for reopening our economy too early during the pandemic. Georgia should have never been shut down in the first place. And President Trump implemented protectionist tariffs that increase prices for all Americans. President Biden has continued them. The truth is, this inflation has been bipartisan.
All right. So first thing I want you to note is that when Ryan is standing there, he's reading from a script. So I'm going to get to that in just a moment. But he's standing there, and you can see that his shoulders are kind of a little bit lower, and you see that his arms are kind of tucked in right up next to his body. His arms don't move. You might have noticed where Chase and Shane in previous clips, kind of opened themselves up. This is a very good thing to do. I recommend that people learn to use their hands, not too much. You don't want to be distracting, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you're open because it gives that sense of confidence. So now Ryan's reading from a script. So it doesn't sound like he's actually talking to people to try to bring them in, okay? But instead, it sounds like he's kind of just reciting words. Now, it may seem weird because anybody that knows me knows that any one of my podcasts that I do solo where I don't have a guest, they're scripted. I'm reading from a script right now, deviating somewhat. The difference is when you read from a script, what you have to do is you have to glance your eyes around. You have to continue with some of this nonverbal body language, and then you have to say things. You have to recite it in a way that makes it feel like it's very, very organic and natural, and it's very hard to do. It's not that his message was wrong. It was a good message. But I think the delivery actually lets Jones off too easy by reading it rather than communicating to the Georgians who are watching, and anyone else really, who the bad guy really is and why Ryan would be different. You have to ask yourself, at one point in that last response, he said, Georgia should have never been shut down in the first place. So the question we might ask ourselves is, not if he said that, so how many Georgians walked away saying, you know what? He's right. We should have never been shut down in the first place. I'm glad that he had the nerve to get up there on stage and say it. All right. So now I'm not trying to be too harsh on Ryan. I've actually met Ryan. I've actually met all three of these candidates. I've met Ryan, and one of the reasons that I'm giving this particular criticism is because in meeting him, I went up to Georgia and I went to their state convention. Okay. This was back a while back when I was supporting our national secretary or she had been suspended, and I was supporting our, I guess, formerly national secretary who had been suspended in her run for reelection to the LNC, the National Libertarian Party. When I got up to Georgia and I started talking to Ryan, one of the things that I noticed about him is that he was relatively aggressive with me and he had no problem. Now, he wasn't rude, but he was tough. And the questions that he asked me in terms of why should he support the reelection of Karen Ann Harlos, he was tough, and he kind of kept coming at me really tough. And that's the kind of toughness that I think he needs to display while he's on a stage. Now, again, it's not huge criticism like, oh my gosh, he's terrible, he shouldn't be in that position. Everybody will have some criticism. It doesn't matter who you are. There is an opportunity for you to improve. Okay. The message was great. Now we need to move on to the next step, which is, all right, how can we best deliver our message? Where did we do well? What are the things that we want to make sure that we keep in mind to repeat? And where are the areas where we were a little weak and we can do better? That's all this is. I think all of them did very well. I would be proud to support them in any way I could if they were on the debate stage again. I think they make great candidates. They're not at all embarrassing to the party whatsoever. This is simply a matter of critiquing each other and expecting critique from others. How else will we get better? That's how our communication of the message of liberty improves. Dale Carnegie once said, there are always 3 speeches for every one you gave: the one you practiced, the one you gave, and the one you wish you gave. I want to thank you for watching. Tune in tomorrow as I bring on Brandon Davis, the Libertarian candidate for the governor of Nevada. Given the time zone difference, tomorrow's episode will also be pre-recorded. So apologies for anyone who might want to be in the chat asking questions. I want you to find other episodes at libertydad.com and archived video episodes at youtube.libertydad.com. You can also connect with me at LibertyDad on Facebook, LibertyDadPod on Twitter, or email to libertydadpodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week.